Hello.
Hi, Mrs. Virtual. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am well.
Is that tea?
Yeah, it's tea. I made tea.
Okay, the okay, the it looked bigger than when it was sitting on the table. I was like, what is that giant
Well,
pitcher?
it isn't a beer cup, but mhm,
It
it's
looked
humongous.
yeah, it looked double the size. It looked like a barrel. I was like, wow,
Yeah,
this is gonna be an
I'm
intense conversation if that's what you got. Hold on, let me pull out my water.
oh yeah. Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, Dara. I'm so thankful you're here with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation and wherever it may go.
Let's take a breath together. Breathe in through your nose and release. How's your heart doing?
Great.
What can you thank COVID for?
Um, I got to spend a lot of time with my family in Canada that I wouldn't normally get to spend. And in that time, I lost a few loved ones, not related to COVID, but in relation to length of life and illness. And I wouldn't have had that time in the normal course of the way that the academic year unfolds. I'm also thankful for the opportunity to learn more about how my daughter learns about challenges and to support her more closely as she was figuring those things out. We're incredibly close. We've spent an insane amount of time together. Um, and so that we got to be really together during that time. Instead of, I was very lucky. I got to stay home for most of COVID while she was at home with no pressure from my employer. And as a result of that, I got to learn from her and learn from her needs. Um, my work schedule was crazy, like many people. Um, but by seeing up close her challenges, uh, I learned to watch and listen in new ways and recalibrate to better support someone who was going through this sort of sense of global crisis for the first time, and and to really be there for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I can imagine those that when September 11th happened, it was a bit of a
Yeah.
pause, but then everybody had to get back into routine. And a lot of kids in that generation couldn't make sense of what really happened.
Well, so I was in DC for September 11th and then moved to New York, like a year later. So I can say that the difference is that the event of 9/11 happened in one moment, and the reverb from it is still ongoing, right?
Mhm.
In terms of changing safety protocols, changing the way people think about what terror looks like, the way that people who were directly impacted by it feel about security, which is very different from COVID, in that I think people of all backgrounds It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Anything. There's no one who is just innately protected from COVID-19. And it wasn't a day or a moment. It's like still going. And I think everyone, rather than a community or a portion or a country, everyone will have to grapple with what it means to protect yourself and others, to balance your heart and your mind, to make peace with the life that you have, to make the most of it, to connect with your loved ones, to support each other. I think there's the showing of resilience in face of COVID is really phenomenal. It's a really phenomenal, and I think that when and if COVID subsides, there's going to be a lot of really great taking stock of what people have done that I think we can learn so much from. Not in terms of like national policies, global policies and practices. That's good. And that's important in terms of what organizations do in terms of the public management of a crisis, which is critical. But all disasters are on a local level. They're always on a local, more personal level. And so when we look at what communities did to support their most vulnerable, what we can do to be better at that, that is what I'm excited about. How can we be better as regular individuals, not people who are trained to do certain jobs, to um, to foster more resilient communities that when disasters happen, and I know there are three elderly people 6 doors down, that there's a better framework for the kinds of things that we in our neighborhood can do to support that, physically, spiritually, mental health wise, all of those kinds of things. There's so much that came out of this that I'm excited to learn about when more of the news and information is available.
Yeah. Can you share with the listeners what your profession is?
So I am an academic dean at a college in New York City. In my work, what I kind of wear two hats. One is to support students in earning their degrees. So in the sense that when you think about going to college, there's somebody there who cares that you graduate from college. And what we know is that getting into school is easier than finishing school. It just is. Being in school is really hard. And most of the students that I support are, a lot of them are first in their family to go to college. A lot of them are working 2 or 3 jobs to pay for college. They qualify based on this sort of um, threshold that is used in the US. They qualify for maximum financial aid based on their household income, which for New York City is incredibly low. And so the task of finishing college in 4 years is really hard when you have a number of contexts where your obligations are split in multiple places. Many of our students are commuting 2 hours a day each way, 2 hours each way to get from home to school. They're likely going to work right after they finish their classes or coming from work in order to go to classes. Um, from our surveys, many are provide childcare. So you can imagine when COVID-19 hit, what that would have looked like to, as you know, to be in school, to have childcare, to have to work as well. And we also learned that many of our students are essential workers, or that new category we use for essential workers and first responders. So their shifts change dramatically, but also their sense of safety, and the stress that comes with it. So in my work, um, I support students in regardless of the context that is impacting them, in the strategies and the programs and the structures to help them graduate. I'm also an academic dean, meaning that my work connects to all of the majors and curriculum at my institution. So making sure that our curriculum is such that when you stick your 4, 6, 8 years, however long it takes to finish, that it was worth it, that you had the kind of material with the support of our fantastic faculty that is going to translate into your success after college. So that's in a long version of not just what I do, but why what I think what I do matters. Because, um, if you get into college, you should be at an institution where they're doing everything they can to help you finish college. And I'd like to think that that's the cool part about what I get to do, is to figure that out, so that when you cross the stage, the experience you had in school translates into something that when you get out there, you're going to use your talents and in invest it well in the world.
Has COVID changed how you support and serve in this role?
100%. Um, the the challenge with COVID for an institution like mine, which was not designed as an online school. Um, and we are in the middle of a digital divide kind of context, right? So we're a public institution with limited resources. So the idea that we would have the kind of money to just flip the switch and go online just like that is not the case. So, together with the faculty, we basically rebuilt the whole institution in 4 days to move online. Um, our IT unit worked round the clock to bring systems up to speed to be able to support that load. But they also did something really incredible, which is to find as much resources as they could get their hands on to get hotspots and Chromebooks and laptops, because we do not have students who would have spare thousands to go and buy that kind of stuff. So getting loaner laptops out when it wasn't safe anymore for people to travel to come to campus, our IT folks were shipping them out, or going with our public safety folks in vans, dropping them to students at their homes around the 5 boroughs. It's incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible. And in terms of our faculty, learning to use software and equipment and tools to in their classes that they hadn't done before, in days. I mean, in days. Because if your school shuts down, and there's a severe disruption, students don't get their credits. And by the time the transition to online happened with COVID, you're in the middle of a semester. So you could imagine what that would be like for, I think that year, 4,000 students graduated that May. For 4,000 students to lose their credits and not graduate, for the other 12,000 behind them to lose their credits and not move up to the next level. I mean, that's aside from disastrous, it's demoralizing for people who didn't do anything wrong other than be here while a disaster struck. So it was really incredible. But, online learning is different. It's very different. Um, it challenges your reading skills, your writing skills. Depending on accessibility issues, participating online is going to be drastically different. And not all of our students had access to private, comfortable, quiet spaces at home to do their work or to be in their classes. So you learn a lot about how learning experiences vary when all of a sudden you are in somebody's home, right? So right now you are in my bedroom and and I'm in your bedroom and we're having this conversation. Now, that's a little different than having 90 people plus your professor in your bedroom, while your children are walking in and out and need your time and attention, while there's an elderly parent that needs your time and attention, and so on. Um, and so, what COVID has really done for me, I'm speaking me personally, um, I've had good fortune in my role of having lots and lots of needs, right? I'm very open about the fact that I'm a single mom and my closest relative is in Ottawa, Canada. I've been very open about this. And so when my daughter is sick from school, she's either coming with me from school or I need to work from home. Or I live about 2 hours away from my work. So if the trains are going down, I need to get out the door. I need to do, there's things like that that my employer has been very supportive and accommodating about. I've been really, really lucky. And I think one of my achievements has been extending the support that I've received to the 110 staff members that I have in my unit. So if you're having a child, you just had a child, you have any challenges, health issues, family issues, and so on, my group of people know that they have the ability to work through their schedules and their challenges and figure that out. When COVID hit, I got the opportunity um, to try and figure out what that means for students and how we can um, be as humanitarian in our work online, in balancing curricular and academic standards with the reality of suffering, fear, anxiety, stress, trauma, loss. We're in New York in the middle of an epicenter, one of the early epicenters, tremendous loss. If moving forward with school was what you were hoping to do, um, we were there trying to figure out how to make that work. If you couldn't continue, we were there trying to figure out how refunds worked or what the support looked like to get you in the right place. I'm really proud of the fact that our school, the only thing our school kept open was a food pantry, right? So the library had to close, which was very unfortunate because a lot of students used the library for the Wi-Fi and for quiet spaces to study. But health-wise, we had to close it. But our president insisted that the food pantry remain open. Housing insecurity, food insecurity, those are very real challenges in New York City. And at that time, to figure out how to be the kind of school that could respond in a crisis, even while distanced, was one of the ironically, one of the joys and highs of my career.
Sometimes people think people's professions come very linear and all great. And it's like, there's
Oh
some
no, I hope
challenges.
no, I hope that I hope I hope nobody ever thinks that um
I think some people really
about
do.
me. Really? That's interesting, because the academy is hard. It's really, really hard, especially when you intersect with three or four groups that have been historically shut out of what is considered to be a centerpiece of knowledge production, right? And if you think about what formal, and I'm only speaking about formal education because I hope that anyone who listens to your show and anyone who is exploring the world broadly would understand that there are many places and ways to gain knowledge. um, Formal education is just one of them. So I'm limiting myself to formal education because I believe in and recognize that we can gain knowledge in a number of places. But my pathway in this world, my professional pathway, has been through formal education. And as a Black woman from the Caribbean who has immigrated like four times, um, you know, all of that identity space is not um, innate in formal education. In fact, formal education has been weaponized for hundreds of years against pick any of the identity spaces that I'm pointing to. And so when you go into the academy representing diverse lenses and knowledges and so on, it can be really hard because you're running up against tradition and history. And so much of how we arrive to new conclusions in the academy is based on traditional styles and modes of experimenting and and um, proving that something is valid in a a style that was there at a time when the academy was very much invested in um, preserving a sort of a upper wealthy white male hetero normativity, right? So I start with that because if you understand that aspect of formal education, and I mean, if you just look at the US, for example, um, desegregation of schools happened started the decision was like 1954. 1954. It's not that far off that formal education has been weaponized. In fact, I'd just say like yesterday, still being weaponized, right? So my path is not straightforward at all. In fact, how I ended up here is less planned than people might think. Uh, I I've always been good at school, but I've also always been good at being a problem in school, in that there are the things that the teacher has planned, none of which I want to talk about or write about. So I raise my hand and do something that represents what I want to do more broadly. So if you say that we have to do a book report and we could pick any book, I'm sure the books that I was picking were not at all what the teacher wanted or expected to see. And I have been that kind of problem always. Many of the things that I remember about school in Canada was always having the alternative. I noticed that we're doing all of this that's Canadian literature. Where is the Black Canadian literature? There's a Black poet in Nova Scotia named George Eliot Clark. Why aren't we studying this? Why aren't we doing that? I'd like to do this. I'd like to do that, and so on. And um, I'm not sure that I would be in this world if it weren't for constantly being bothered by the absence of other ways of other ways that people experience the literary world, media world, and so on. So, so in fact, I am attracted to gaps and absences more so than anything, and that makes for a very difficult path. So I ended up in the U.S. Um, for graduate school because I got tired of being the only one raising her hand to talk about race or to write about Toni Morrison in an American literature class in Canada, where almost everything was focused on white American literature and not anyone else, and so on and so forth. And at a certain point, you just kind of say, what do I actually want to read and write about, as opposed to just talking about the things that that everybody seems to be avoiding? What would I actually love to do if that weren't in my way? And so I came here because of that. By the time I ended up in a faculty job, which was exciting and interesting, you start to deal with the other parts of what it means to be like the only one in your department, even though the students you are teaching broadly represent you. All of the faculty around you do not. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do you get your work evaluated and judged by people who do not represent the experiences that you're writing about? At the time that I was publishing, the kinds of things that I was writing about were not what you would read in the most popular journals for my field, because most of that stuff was not really about race and gender and so on. You kind of had to go to the journals about race and gender to publish in those. So it was always very difficult, very difficult, and something that I appreciate that I cut my teeth on that, because I truly believe that if you are attracted to gaps and committed to addressing those gaps, while you might help to fill in those gaps, you also learn important things about yourself, how what your natural state of resilience is, how you build up your capacity to keep moving when things take you on a winding path instead of a linear one. No one in the world who has tried to address a gap goes from point A to B. If you're committed to that, as you described earlier in your experience with homeschooling, you're going through a lot of zigzags and circles and back to square one and moving and restarting and so on. But in that is something really magical in terms of um, determining what it is you're truly committed to. And you find along the way that the most important gap that you filled in was actually something in yourself, as opposed to that external thing. So no, it was never easy, but it was the right one for me.
You did it your way.
100%, 100%. And I think that's the cool thing about life, right? Is that is that it never works out the same way for everybody, but facing the things that are challenging you, if we have the goal to do it, teaches you new things every single day.
For the listeners, it's understanding that your school specializes a lot in justice. You're dealing with COVID, and then we're dealing with people being murdered, court trials going
Hmm.
on,
Hmm.
and trauma as a globe. I'm really honored to be your friend, to know you. And I'm also honored of seeing the kind of institute that you're in, of the integrity towards humanity and not forgetting that.
So it's funny you should say that because um, I think that our school was in two crises last year, right? So um, it, our college is focused on justice. Criminal justice is a huge part of that. And in the wake of George Floyd, which is the second crisis unfolding with COVID-19, um, it was a true moment of reckoning on the campus, as well as everywhere else in the US for sure, but especially on a campus that has longstanding ties to police education. And we were founded in the height of the civil rights movement, 1964, with the purpose of educating police officers with a liberal arts education. And so it's an interesting concept, the idea of educating police officers not with criminal justice education exclusively, but um, diverse knowledges, diverse perspectives, and so on. But we're also a centerpiece of criminal justice education and remain so, in addition to being a centerpiece of social justice education. More than 50% of our alumni are in public service. And so the institution really grappled with what that means to serve the public when questions about who is serving it, or is it possible to be just in in uniformed service? And I think we're probably the only institution in the country that can answer that question, because it draws on a deep consideration of what public safety means and what including the entire population in public safety means. In fact, our president has, in the wake of George Floyd, was working with the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives, I believe that's their name, Noble, with this sort of large series of conversations nationwide around reimagining public safety. What does that look like? And I think COVID really was the ideal time to have that kind of conversation, because as a society, I think well, globally, we're all a little more in touch with what um, pain, suffering, difficult times, mental health, what that looks like. And so the it opened up, I think, more awareness and engagement with what people are really going through. I would not wish the George Floyd experience on anybody. If I had to say one thing that um, grew up out of that horrifying um, injustice is, I mean, tremendous impact at the right time where people were um, in tune with horror, right? I mean, horror. And the conversations that emerged out of it um, across political lines, different age groups, different perspectives and experiences. I mean, right now in law enforcement, there's so many conversations around um, policing and mental health, both in terms of the officers themselves, but also how you um, treat and respond to calls where the person um, is, it might be, the category sometimes used is emotionally disturbed, because there are a lot of incidences that did not go well, to put it mildly, due to lack of training in this area and so on. So I'm very hopeful, and I think that what I love about my institution is this sort of sense of continuous improvement, that public safety is a really uh, important conversation to have, but it's one that all stakeholders in a society should be at the table, not just policymakers, not just law enforcement professionals, not just people who work in criminal justice. It is all of us. We are the public, and we are the ones that get to weigh in on these things. And I think that um, the conversations that we have at my school are a good reflection of that slice of things.
You mentioned during COVID that you had to experience grief with losing loved ones and family members.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I would like to bring the listener into knowing that your father transitioned way back, not way back, yet it
Yeah.
feels way back. Could you let the listeners know how long it's been since your father transitioned?
Yeah. I mean, geez, it is way back. That's 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So it's way back.
yeah, how has that been navigating with that grief?
Um, you know, as anyone who has experienced loss of a loved one um, will know, is that grief can be all encompassing in the beginning, because you have the physical and the psycho emotional social kinds of things, all of that. In my case, I lived away, so where my family lives and where I was living at the time were a plane ride away. And I think that kind of heightened a lot of the sort of um, I'm alone in a bubble kind of thing, because I wasn't with my family. At the same time, what I learned in all of that, because there's nothing quite like your first big loss, right? Um, what you learn always is that grief is a process. It's not a moment in time. It's not an event. It's a process, and you go through a process. And that if you let the process be, without fear, without the sort of where am I going with this and what does this mean? If you go through the process first, then reflect back on the process, you can see something that I think we talk very little about, which is this sort of innate resilience that human beings seem to have. That when you that going through the process is challenging, because this is a connection. It's we are social beings with bonds and attachments, and losing a major bond and attachment, if you had a problematic relationship or a great relationship, it's still something around what a bond means that you have to process. I had a fantastic relationship with my dad. Oh my gosh. I my one of my few regrets in life is that how I got here and what I'm doing is directly in relation to all of the things that my parents um, supported and helped me to do. And my dad passed right at the end of my schooling, right? So, he was there for my doctoral graduation and the start of a research position that I had, and my first year in when I became a professor, but he wouldn't have seen what I made of that. And the reason that that is not sad, it's a regret because I would have liked for him to see that, is I can look back and reflect on what that relationship has done and what that meant and how it translated into something that is very present and very here. And I think that is what the gift of resilience, right? Is that the relationship or the bond can continue to bear fruit even in the absence of that person's physical sense, right? Um, would I have thought 17 years ago that that's where I would be? Absolutely not, because that was my dad and he suffered, right? He had cancer and he died pretty young. At the time I thought he was old, quite frankly. But now that I'm 44 and he would have died at 57, 58, or maybe 56, it's like, oh, that's young. When I was 26, 56 was like grown. At 44, I work with people who are 56, 57, 60, 65, 70, and they're young and they're fine and so my perspective has changed, but always what I'm super grateful for is that going through that process, and again, I said this a little bit earlier, discovering more about my sense of resilience, what I just always had, and the opportunity to use that experience, reflect on the process, and attend to the things that were challenging for me. So, for example, I when I am sad like that, I have a tendency to um, close off social interactions. I just want to sit in a corner and cry. I just want to sit in the corner and cry. And then after I sit in the corner and cry, I'm going to start eating some chips. And then I'm just going to be lonely and be miserable and let that all happen. And more recently, when I lost two close people in my family, I have a 10-year-old, so you can't do that in the same kind of a way. And in having the experience and the opportunity to reflect on what 26-year-old me, how I grieved, the benefits of it, and what probably was not the best approach to doing things, I used the opportunity this time around to teach my daughter different things, to talk more about what I'd learned from grieving and the uh, the natural pain that comes from that, and to really get in touch with how visceral that is, right? Um, I think I got to do it better this time because of just going into it as opposed to running from it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing with death and grief that I would like to see more discussions with, that there is a sacredness and an honoring of the pain. And as intense and as visceral as it feels, it's the process that you're able to process that shit to turn your garden vibrant. Yet it's challenging to navigate in the depths of that pain. Yet what I've noticed in my own experience with grief is that it's a different language of love that we're not used to. And the depths of that love, it's like, whoa, this is a whole other place. It gives you such a different perspective. And I think it stretches your empathy and compassion for life in such a different degree. Hindsight is 2020. Now seeing all this and having the knowledge, what do you think you needed that you had no idea you needed? And that would have helped you better process the grief?
Um, Less guilt. So I wanted to go home. I was at a conference in Chicago, an academic conference in Chicago, which, as part of your um, work towards your standing in higher education, you have to present papers at academic conferences and so on. So I was at a conference in Chicago and had a plan to go to Milwaukee to visit a friend that I hadn't seen in maybe like 7 or so years. And I was going home the following week because it was American Thanksgiving. So I was going home the following week to see my family. And when I called my mom, she was at the hospital, and she put the phone to my dad's ear, and we had a quick conversation. He asked me when I'm coming, and I said I'm coming soon. And I said tomorrow, but that actually was not true. I said tomorrow. Um, because when I heard him, I was like, oh, I'm changing my plans and I'm going home tomorrow. And when my mom came back on the phone, I said, Mom, I'm coming home. And she said, no, 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 you have your conference. You have to do your conference. Your dad would not want you to do this. He's sleeping most of the days anyway. You need, this is, he would not be happy. Um, And I said, yeah, but I'm supposed to go to Milwaukee and so on. And she was like, you need to do that. This is, you have a long road up ahead. And if you can have any joy, any fun, I want you to do that. And if anything happens and you are mad at me, I can take it. But this is, you really need to go and enjoy your conference and spend time with your friend, and we'll see you next week. And he he passed away 2 days before my flight. And that was, I knew, like, it's so interesting the way that people are connected, but I knew that that was going to happen. Actually, I knew the month before that this was going to happen, because when I last saw him and I left the hospice, I cried because in my head I said, that was this is the last time. And yet I felt so bad for a really long time that I didn't leave Chicago and go home. I felt really, really bad about that. Even though I can fully attest that everything that my mom said is true. My dad would have not, if I had dropped my bags and landed in that hospice and he were awake to tell me, he'd been like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? No, you go. Um, I know that for sure. There is no ill sense whatsoever. But yet I still stayed in my grieving, holding on to something that actually wasn't a true reflection of what he would have felt or anyone would have felt, right? And if hindsight really worked well and I could go back on those kinds of things, it would have been that. Digging in further to figure out why I was holding on to something that intellectually I knew was not important, right? And there's nothing great comes from guilt as an emotion because um, you can't act on it when it comes to death. You know, if you feel guilty about lying to a friend, you can go back and fix that. And so, what that has turned into for me, that I guess was a good lesson to learn and a good thing to go through, is you don't really find me saying, I have regrets. Um, if I have a feeling about something, I just do it. Um, Case in point, 2 weeks ago when you sent me something and I said I'm going to go drop something off, and it was just like a thought I had, I just do it. Because I think that life is really short. And what I learned from my dad is that you can do great things with your life, help a lot of people, have um, plans to help even more people, and invest your time wisely. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are promised a year from then, 2 years from then, or even your retirement. And if that is the case, that doesn't mean that you go and do different things. It just means that you reduce the amount of times that you say, I wish I had, I wish I did. And I'm a pretty gutsy chick as a result of things like that. So, if there is something that I want to do, and it makes sense for me, I might not even be qualified. I will apply. I will try. Not because I'm going to win, but I don't want to ever say, I wonder what would have happened if I had done this. And I think that thing, first experiencing it as guilt, I wish I had, I wish I had, I wish I had. Digging in deeper, what does that mean? Because absolutely nobody is asking me to feel guilty. And if my mom heard this, she would be like, really? You sat there upset for years on something that your father wouldn't even have cared about. He would have wanted you to do that exact thing. Digging in deeper, you realize that the things that you feel guilty about have nothing to do with anybody else, right? It never does. It never does. But if you leave it as the projection from one person to the next, if you leave it that way, then you miss the opportunity to really find something better that can come out of that guilt. And for me, it's like, I just don't spend time anymore on, um, I don't think I can, and what if, and if it's not for me, it's not, and I won't get it. Or worst case scenario, I fail. I failed so many times, it's not even funny. Do people remember that? No. What they see, like most people will say, wow, Dara, you've done so many things, and this has happened, and that's happened. Yeah, because every time I have the thought, I just try. I just try. Um, and, you can't get the ball in the basket if you don't shoot. So I shoot a lot, and I would attach it to that. And the last thing I would just say is, if you let it, some really beautiful things come out of grief, because it's still about a relationship that had significance. Some relationships have significance because they were harmful. Some relationships have significance because they were helpful or important. Either way, um, when you go back to that relationship and make sense of it, make peace with it, honor what your responses are and what you learn from it, you continue to reinvest the best things into your future. And I think that's what I have done 17 years later.
Yeah, you have. And more. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. Look out for part 2 of this conversation I had with Dara, where we speak about mental health, grief, and she reflects on what she would tell her 18-year-old self. If there was anything in this conversation you think a friend or somebody else could benefit from, please share it out with them. The intention of this podcast is to break the stigmas surrounding mental health and to make those difficult conversations more easier. Please subscribe to the podcast. And if you require more information, you can get us at www.liftoneself.com. I honor your time and I value you. I appreciate you. Until next time, remember, you matter.